Kevin White was mayor of Boston from 1968 to 1984. Though he had shown a true talent for leadership in his early years as mayor, he was not effective in dealing with the Boston busing crisis that gripped the city during the mid-70s. He was unwilling to bring his full abilities to bear to try to fix the problem because he was afraid of losing his political popularity and power, and did not show the capacity for leadership he had exhibited in the past. As a boy, White had been a hellraiser and was kicked out of multiple schools, but he had always shown a natural ability as a leader that others would listen to. Raised in a political family, White joined the family trade, becoming a politician as soon as he was out of Boston College Law School. His father, Joe White, was a prominent figure in Boston politics, as was his mother-in-law, Mother Galvin. It was due to them that he won his first major position, Secretary of State. In 1968, he became mayor of Boston and was seen as a strong leader who wanted to help the poorer neighborhoods of his city. For example, he personally visited the scene of a fight in Southend where 10 policemen were injured and tensions were running high. When he got there, hundreds of kids followed him and cheered after he reduced agitation and spoke about Southend's future. On the night of Martin Luther King's assassination, when riots racked cities across the nation, White kept Boston under control. A James Brown concert, with a mostly black audience, was scheduled that night, and White quickly arranged for it to be locally televised, using the occasion to address the city and ask them to honor King's memory in peace. There was no widespread violence. He again stopped a riot at the Boston Garden 4 years later, the same night he visited Southend, when the Rolling Stones were arrested in Rhode Island. The Garden audience did not know where they were, and tensions in the city were high. White spoke to them as he had before, explaining that he'd gotten their idols out of jail for them, and asked them to just go home after the concert, without any violence. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and there were no arrests at the Garden that night. White clearly had the ability to inspire large numbers of people, and wished to support minority interests, but did not use all of his talents as the busing crisis emerged. When Judge Arthur Garrity ordered that busing be used to desegregate Boston's schools, White knew that allying himself with busing would be political suicide. Many white citizens in Boston and the country as a whole were against this solution. He was caught in a dilemma. In his early years as mayor, he had worked to help the poor and minorities and supported the right to a quality education, but he also sympathized with White's opposition to busing. He claimed that he was in support of desegregation, but disagreed with the method proposed for achieving it. At one point, he even stated that there would be no busing as long as he was mayor, a promise he surely knew he would not be able to keep. There was, after all, no way to successfully integrate schools without busing students across the city. Perhaps White's actions can be understood by examining his goals. By 1974, when the busing crisis began, White had presidential aspirations. People could relate to him, he was a good speaker, he believed in helping people. He had a real shot at it. But he had to keep the peace in his own city. If he couldn't control Boston, how could he control the United States of America? He was unable to stop the riots by stopping busing because a federal court ordered it, yet he could not support busing because that would destroy his popularity with white citizens. Voicing support would cost him the next mayoral election and his presidential hopes. The latter would also be lost by disobeying a federal law, the other option. White did what he thought he could without truly taking a stand. He arranged peace talks, they ended in violence. He made a deal with one of his longtime rivals, Louise Day Hicks, but the most that came out of the alliance was that Hicks let the mayor's office know when she knew violence was likely to take place. She could not control the movement she had started. White, desperate to curb the rising violence, turned to the man who had given the busing order, Judge Garrity. White wanted federal marshals because they held more authority than police, who were losing control. Federal marshals would also demonstrate that this was the work of a federal judge, enforced by federal power. White didn't want the mayor's office associated with the violence, and wanted to emphasize the fact that this was a federal issue. White tried to explain the symbolism to Garrity, who responded that it was security, not symbolism, that was needed. The judge maintained that no marshals could be deployed until all local and state resources, police from surrounding areas, state police, and the National Guard, had been utilized. White also appealed to President Ford, who was unwilling to get involved. His politics were much the same as the mayor's: be pro-integration but not pro-busing, and avoid taking a stand. He did not want to get involved in the state's politics and refused White's request for federal aid. White was on his own. White's ambition to become president caused him to lose sight of his duty as mayor, helping the city of Boston. His fear of losing popularity made him unwilling to use his full abilities to deal properly with the crisis before him. The violence in the city grew worse as the busing continued, but no real actions were taken. As the city was consumed by rioting, his run for the highest office in the nation was consumed as well. People saw his failure to control his own charge and concluded that he would clearly be unable to control an entire country. White gave up in his last years as mayor, completely obsessed with winning his next election and keeping his office. He'd tried to save his presidential run by not committing to the busing crisis, but in the end, both the campaign and his city fell apart.